And one thing you'll notice about, that I think is in common between Vicki and Gordon, is what I would call a flexible, different approach to education. If you think about the traditional K-12 education models developed at the turn of the 20th century, and there's some books talk about it in a factory assembly line. We go to first grade, second grade, we put them in a class, we do the check the box, and we have a list of things, and we just kind of move them on through. And to be honest, academia in colleges is basically a model that was designed to educate the elite 5% of people, to give them a classical education. And now we're trying to turn it into a job program. And basically, as anything else, the very large institutions are difficult to move with modern time. Then you couple that with the fact that technology and life moves at a much faster pace, having a hard time keeping our model up to date with what we're actually delivering. So we're now going to open up the questions. I have a couple of questions first. I'll get started, and then we'll bring up the lights and get to the audience. So for Vicki, you and I talked about this beforehand, but the buzzword today in education, the only thing you really hear about now is standards. And we're not going to talk about Common Core here, I promise, but we have the movement in the past 20 years to get very detailed and fine prescription to standards. The standards for one grade in the state of Georgia are probably 25, 30 pages of detailed. And the goal of that, I think, was to make sure that the kids are learning the right things. And in the poor schools, everybody knew that, yeah, the kids are just getting babysat and they're really not learning anything. I think the goal of the standards was to make sure that something could actually happen there and these kids were learning what they were supposed to. But I know that you have a different opinion, and so do I, that we may have gone overkill. You comment a little about standards of where you think the standard level should be, and then how that would factor into policyholders being able to say, okay, I actually believe that school is teaching my kids what they're supposed to.
Well, I had a researcher who talks about this on my podcast not too long ago, and he said basically that a teacher can really comprehend and go towards about 7 meta standards at a time. Like cognitively, as a teacher, you just can't get your arms around 180 standards. I will know teachers that spend all of their time aligning standards and not writing lesson plans, and you wonder who the audience is. A lot of teachers spend so much time doing paperwork, and it's just kind of over the top. I mean, I think that we should really condense down and say, okay, what's really important? My son's taking a virtual school class right now, and he had to memorize the dates that the FBLA was founded, 10 dates. And I teach the same stuff, but I don't teach any of that. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, who wrote that into the standards? Like, I guess the FBLA people did, but was that really important for a business and technology class to memorize 10 of the most important dates in the history of FBLA? And it just feels like standards overkill. So I think that if you try to do everything, you accomplish nothing. And Deming said that, whatever gets measured gets done, and in fact, that's the only thing that gets done. But, Kip is an engineer, and he says if he wants to improve anything, he just charts it and puts it on a wall. Okay, but if you had a wall with a progress on 124 or 184 standards, what do you look at? Like, what can you understand about that? So I really think that we've got to have some common sense and get down to saying, okay, what's the most important? Can every child read? And are they pursuing things that they also love? Are there, the strengths? Are they inventing? Are they creating? And e-portfolios and having portfolios are a great thing. The struggle with portfolios is that it's notoriously horrible that if I have a portfolio at my school and you have a portfolio at your school, we assess it so different that you can't use portfolios to really benchmark schools against each other. But you could have the existence of a portfolio as part of the measure. And with the ESSA Act, you've actually got a lot of flexibility to define what you think that success is and what it means in the state. So we really, I hope, can be creative. But right now, we've got standards paralysis. And fortunately, I'm in a small private school. I write my own curriculum. I have my standards, but there are times where the opportunity to program apps came along. I said, you know what? Standards are going out the window. We're programming apps for 6 weeks. And I will tell you that when I went back and looked, we met all those standards and more. But there are times when you want to, as a teacherpreneur, take advantage of opportunities, and a lot of teachers cannot do it. About half the schools that sign up to collaborate on the projects where we build apps together, about half of the public schools from the state of Georgia have to drop out because they can't stay in. And that's a shame. There are a lot of public schools we do collaborate with in the projects, but they just, I have to test. I have to meet these standards. I can't build apps because I have to teach some dates or something. And I'm thinking, it's a computer science class. I mean, come on, program. So anyway, but I guess the practical farmer's daughter just thinks that we, Dad always just said, what's my yield? And I guess it's harder to figure that out when you're dealing with education. But I do think that we've got to be careful to keep adding more standards on, what are we going to accomplish? I wish we could just have one vision statement that this is what we want every child in the state of Georgia to have, no matter where you are, and have a dream and go towards it.
Awesome. So Gordon, I talked a little bit about the technical college system because it's kind of relative to the same type of thing you're talking about. I had a young man who was an Eagle Scout in my boy's Boy Scout troop, who cerebral palsy kid, a little different, smart kid, but his mom was looking for something different for him, and he went to technical college, and in 2 years got a very high-paying job. But in talking to the mom, she was having the same thing, because in my area, in affluent suburbs, John Creek, South Forsyth, it's the stigma, right? Oh, you're not going to college. Mm-hmm. Oh, really? What's wrong? And unfortunately, that's out there. Is there any progress being made there? Or some of the things you're doing there? Is there anything we can do as policymakers to try to get rid of the sort of stigma that everybody has to go to college? Or have you seen any best practices there?
Yeah, it really takes, I think, some success examples. I mean, TCSG is probably one of the best systems for technical colleges in the country. But they have an image problem. And again, I think that goes back to high school guidance counselors, most of whom are programmed, get these kids into a college. And, if they can't achieve them, maybe we can talk about technical. And we've got to remove that stigma and show, by example, people who have good paying jobs and exciting jobs in areas that didn't require a 4-year degree. But high school kids today are not getting that exposure, with few exceptions. Maybe in Camilla they are, because there's more opportunity in that area for the technical college job. But until that stigma is overcome, people are only going to look at a technical school as a last resort. And typically, and this is why the profile of their typical student is 28, 29 years old. Right. And they've usually kicked around for the last 5 or 6 years in odd jobs. Mm-hmm. And they finally wake up and realize, okay, I got to do something better than bagging groceries. I got a family. I'm going to get myself some skills. Here's a mostly free opportunity to get education and get a real job.
There you go. Awesome. I do believe that Georgia really has done a good job with the technical college system, and they advertise heavily during the Georgia high school football playoffs and things like that, and I know that they're trying to rebrand their image a little bit. And again, the irony of your problem is seeing all these kids, 50% of them go to college and drop out and have debt and no real job, and then a shortage of people who could get a 2-year technical college degree and make $45,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. The irony there is something else. Okay, this time I'm going to open up the floor to questions. I see at least one back here, and I see 2 coming. So we'll take some questions.
I'd like to, a moment, try to tie together the previous 2 panels with this one. One of the things that was discussed is the idea of the need to improve health and health outcomes and reduce health disparities in Georgia. Georgia being literally in the lowest quintile of all the states across the country in terms of health outcomes. One way to improve population health, it has been asserted by some folks that I know in the field, is to improve education. That in fact the education link and improving health outcomes is a very strong, vital one. What I'd like to know is if you guys agree with this proposition, if you could speak to it, and if you do, how might we go about the business of strengthening the link between investment in education and investment in health?
You want to start? Just so I understand the question, it's the investment in health at an earlier stage so that people can concentrate on education, because in many cases people drop out of school for health reasons. Is that part of the issue?
It's more like that the more educated people are,
The healthier they are.
the healthier they are.
Yeah.
The greater the chance they have
That's right.
reducing health disparities.
There's a strong correlation between education level and general health levels.
Right. The question is, which causes which?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a concern, and there's a strong link. You will find that the worse educated someone has, they're probably going to have more health problems. So again, good health care is essential to people completing their education.
I know the subject came up when I was the first year out of legislature in the school turnaround bill last year of, if schools are failing, how much of it is on the teachers and the school, how much of it is on the surrounding environment? In other words, is it because the kids are healthy or are unhealthy, or not properly fed and things like that? So I think it all interacts, and I think it also goes back to mental health as well, because if I'm less educated than one of Gordon's dropouts who has a low-end, dead-end job, that leads to depressive and mental challenges, which leads to behaviors that are going to make you less healthy. So I don't know, Vicki.
So let's go back to this whole idea that we talked about earlier of, if there are schools, like you mentioned, one in Louisiana, in a very poor area who are achieving incredible results, it means it can be done.
That's right.
The problem is everybody, as Mike said earlier, has their opinion about how to improve education. It doesn't necessarily hold water. So I really think this whole concept of, okay, we've got struggling schools here in a very poor area. What are the other schools that have turned it around and are in a similar situation, and what are they doing, and set up, you know how you have sister cities where you learn from each other and they're very similar? You could really almost have that same approach with schools. We call them best practices. There are best practices in schools that are doing it. They're all over the place that are doing it. So how are they doing it, and can we pair up those relationships? Because here's the thing, I was talking to somebody in D.C. and they said we have NCLB PTSD in this country. So we've gone from like too much accountability to no accountability, in some ways. And we need to have accountability. But I just think that what we can do to facilitate those connections, because honestly, if you have a principal at a struggling school, there's some things that he or she will talk to a principal who has turned it around about on a private connection that they would never air in public. So building those connections and those relationships, I think, is a key part of improving education. And we can do it within the state, or you can even do it outside of the state. But if somebody's doing it, it means it can be done, and it can be done. But I just don't think that people who are too removed from the situation are going to be the ones to solve it. I think that you have to empower the people on the ground. And if the people on the ground don't have the resources and the accountability and the authority to do it, then you have to help them get that accountability and that authority to be able to do it. And it's not an easy answer, because here's the thing. It requires work. You can't buy a great education. It would be nice, but I know people who spend a whole lot of money and send their kids to a great school and they don't have a very good education. And then I know people who send kids to schools that do have, and a lot of it comes back up to this software right here. And this right here, where we decide people in a community decide they're going to have an excellent education. And I wish it was easy, but it's hard work. And but I do think pairing up schools to share best practices is a key thing we need to start doing.
I agree. It's interesting you brought that up. I will say real quickly that whether you agree or disagree with his policies, Governor Deal's vision of why it was so important to make sure that all the kids in Georgia were getting an education, especially those in failing schools, was it does link up to taxes and health. education, get a stronger education, you get a better job, you contribute better tax revenues to the state, you don't become a ward of the state. Your health is better, which means you're not on Medicaid or things that are going to drain the state's budget. There's a link between all of that, and we know that if we do a bad job of educating our kids, that we're just setting ourselves up for other problems later. Okay, next question, Brian.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Brian Sikanchana. I'm an EdTech entrepreneur here in Atlanta, and I have a few questions for Vicki. I very much enjoyed your presentation. If I may, I'm going to ask, these questions are related, so I'm going to ask them together, and then I'm interested in your thoughts. When I was a freshman at Georgia Tech in 2004, problem-based learning was a relatively new thing for teachers to embrace, though fortunately, especially now that I have two little girls myself in elementary school, I'm seeing examples of problem-based learning, experiential learning popping up all around. But I'm curious to know, what is the current state of our state in terms of problem-based learning and experiential learning becoming the norm? How are we doing, and what can be done to accelerate our traction in that direction? The second question is, your first slide was talking about creativity and how much it's gone down. And I think about how in a lot of the other countries, a lot of Asian countries, they've got higher math scores, science scores. But we've got Google and Facebook, and we've got innovation, we've got creativity. Almost a little bit related to the first question, what are the top 3 things that are being done or could be done to increase the creativity of our children and to keep our country innovative? And then the third question, you talked about Kennedy's charge that we want to go to the moon, and that vision, that vision brought our country together to excel. But you didn't give us any suggestions on what is your common vision, or what could be a common vision we could embrace. Yeah. So do you currently have one? If not, what may that be? So those are my 3 questions. Thank you.
Well, I'll answer your last one first. My common vision would be we would be the best in the world. The question is how you define the best in the world. And for me, can we have people who create and invent? Here's the thing. Compliance does not mean a good education. You can have a child who complies all the way through, checks off every single thing, and they sit there when the day of graduation and they wonder, well, why am I here? And what's my purpose? And do I even know what I'm good at doing? And did anybody actually customize my education to my strengths? So it would be that every single child in the state of Georgia graduates understanding that they know that they matter, they're important, they have a work to do in the world, they know their strengths, and those strengths have been invested in. And they haven't just been beat up on what they're not good at doing. If you stink at math, trust me, you know you stink at math. You don't need everybody to tell you how many times you stink at math and take you out of the art class, which is the only reason you want to go to school, and give you 3 extra hours of math. So I think that children are our future, but every child. So my personal purpose as a teacher is I tell those kids that I want to find something you do better than anybody else in this room. And I will notice things, and I'll say, you know what, you're a great filmmaker, and they go on to be filmmakers. You're an amazing artist, they go on to be artists. But when we are too busy pushing them through the factory, trying to put another widget and check another box, when do we have time for project-based learning? I'm doing some work for a company right now with project-based learning. The problem with project-based learning is teachers say they don't have time for problem-based learning and inquiry-based learning, because they have too much, they have to check off the boxes with their standards, and they have to be on the same page with the others. So I really think we have to reinvent, and as he was talking about this whole personalizing learning, competency-based learning, there are classes where some kids are going faster than others, so say they're very good at chemistry. Why couldn't they be at grade 12 in chemistry and grade 8 or grade 9 in reading? Why do they have to be in this same track that we invented all these years ago? So, if I had a wish, because I'm way too empathetic, and I love every child. They were giving flu shots at the school yesterday, and I cried with every one of them that I saw get a shot. But it's that every child is important. Every child matters. And there are things we can do with technology to personalize learning. There are things, why can't every child in the state actually take a test? And, I mean, that test costs like $15 a kid, where they know that what they're good at doing. But they're shooting in the dark, trying to guess. I think that's part of our dropout rate problem. They don't know what they're good at doing. Oh, Daddy went here, I'm going to go there. Or Mama did that, so I might do that. Or I met a doctor once, so I want to be a doctor, right? They don't have any facts, and I'm able to look at kids and say, here's your strengths, here's your weaknesses. This job is going to be really a good fit for you, but if you go into this medical field right here, you have to memorize a lot of facts, and you're going to have to really work hard to memorize the vocabulary that's required to be a nurse. Are you willing to do that? And they'll say yes or no. But see, they're going in with their eyes wide open when they get a strengths approach, when they know what they're learning. So I kind of think those are tied together. But you know what? Here's the thing. We need visionaries. We need leadership. We need great leaders. We need people who are going to have morals and ethics and do the right thing even when people aren't looking. One thing I learned in D.C. is that sometimes Senator Nunn would do the totally right thing and he would catch all kinds of grief for it because it looked wrong. We've got to care about doing right more than we do about looking right, because in the end I do believe it's going to shake out and it's going to come back around. And we've got to be servant leaders and not just self-serving. So you can call me an idealist, but I'll tell you this. I went to a little tiny school. I still have no budget. My budget's $12,500 a year, okay? And I've built a world-class. It comes back to saying this is what we're going to do. And I love our state, and it breaks my heart. There's no excuse for us to have children who graduate without a purpose. I wouldn't just give them a diploma. I would make sure they had a purpose in their hand and in their heart and knew what they were good at doing. And I think that personalizing, they customize their playlist. They customize their friends list. Why can't we customize the education? It's because most of us who are in charge, we were educated a different way. And we can't get out of the box to realize we have the capability. If we could unleash the technical talent in the state of Georgia, we could really do some amazing things. And you put me on a soapbox, that's a hot button for me. But I just think every child matters. And I don't care what you teach them. If a child thinks they're unimportant, if a child thinks they don't matter in the world, we failed. Because they do. They're very important.
This relates a little bit of a soapbox I'll get on for about 60 seconds, which is what I call autopsy testing, which is the end-of-the-year milestones, CRCT, and, of course, testing, which have some value because they do apply some accountability, and I'm not trying to get out of accountability. But with technology now, we can embed those and make them competency-based and be formative-based so that they happen gradually throughout the school year and are not disruptive things, and the teachers get the information before it's too late and for the end of the year. And to the point, if Johnny is really good in chemistry, he might take that test in February instead of having to wait to every other single kid for the factory model to crank that out. So I think it's an area where I think we have a lot of room for improvement. And Brian, you mentioned creativity. It's something interesting. My company sells 2 video games to China, and I go to China a couple times a year. And there's tons and tons of very capable, very smart, technical Chinese people we work with. But the majority of their video games that they get are from the West. Why? Creativity. Because their education system and their culture, it doesn't value creativity as much as the United States. And what I'm afraid of is that we're not careful with education trends. We could be kind of pushing the creativity out of what we're doing, and then we've lost what is a big advantage that we have in this country right now. All right, any other questions? Valencia. This will be the last question, looks like, from our time.
I appreciate the presentation. One of the questions I have when you talk about innovation and creativity and allowing teachers to really teach, one of the challenges is how do we get that message to our superintendents who are making these decisions? And a lot of times on the state, we get blamed for a lot. But some of the things, like you were saying, being able to be creative in the classrooms, how do we push that message down to the superintendents to get it all the way down the chain to in the classrooms so that the teachers are not? I had one example. So a teacher told me they're having to do 8 lesson plans per subject, and it's due by Thursday. And so I was asking, well, how in the world are you able to execute the lesson plans if you're spending all the time trying to put the lesson plans together? When do you actually teach the kids in the classroom?
Yeah.
And then do you have time to even reteach the stuff that they end up missing? So that was one of the questions is, where does that start and stop at as far as being able to say this needs to stop here and this is how we need to change so that the teachers can teach in the classrooms?
So that you have the opportunity with the ESSA Act to define what is, how are we going to measure success? You have the opportunity to put other measures in there besides test scores. I cannot tell you how important that is. Do I have all the answers for you? I've really tried to give you a menu today. There are some best practices out there for states that are trying it, but all the states are in the same boat. Do they have authentic assessment? Does every school have portfolios? Are students putting in portfolios? Are we looking to see our children's strengths being identified? Have we put arts back in every school, in music, where they belong? Because those are things that really, they even improve math scores, if you can believe that. So how do you get it down? It's hard. It's hard. And, we have a lot of great superintendents, and they have a lot of pressure on them, and they're dealing with the crazy people too, right? Mm-hmm. So, but you're going to have to change how you hold them accountable. You can't leave in place what's been there and expect them to suddenly do things differently. So how are you going to measure success? How are we going to measure success as a state? And I think that's a very important question. And I think, like healthcare, you've got a window of opportunity to deal with that. And if superintendents know, well, we're going to look at maybe strength of diploma like Louisiana, but why not add in strength of your creativity programs? Do you have maker spaces? Have you redone your library and put in a learning's commons? Are you doing Google 20% time? Are you having an innovation week? Are you doing things to spur innovation and creativity? And then how are you exhibiting that work? We could have an online museum for the whole state of Georgia for all of the work of the first graders and the second. Give them a virtual bulletin board. These are things that you can do, but it's hard. I just don't think that you can leave things like they are and expect things to be different just out of the goodness of their hearts. I mean, they're held accountable. They have tough jobs. And right now, it's still all about test scores. It is. And that needs to change. Yes, we need a measure. Some states have capped the number of testing days allowed. Pennsylvania, I believe Texas did it quite a few years back and said you're not allowed to pull them out and test more than X number of days. That is fantastic. Teachers in those states thought that was great, because if you're testing 1 day out of 5, when are you teaching? You look at how many times these kids are being tested, and a lot of them, get testitis and get sick and don't come in, because you get a lot of kids with test anxiety. They've already been so tested by the end of the year test, they're not going to come. So we've got to shift from the focus on standardized testing and get creative. And can we personalize learning? And can we look at their strengths? We've got the capability with technology, and we've got some fantastic people, resources in our state. We just need to start using them.
Okay, I'll wrap it up with one final observation. I think once you bring it up, is one of the challenges of education is there's so many cooks in the kitchen. In the K-12, you have the U.S. Department of Education, you have the governor of your state, you have the legislature of your state, you have the state school superintendent independently elected, you have the state board of education, you have a local board of education, and then you probably have an accrediting agency. So you have 7 things running around setting policy and things, and then you have the poor teacher, and even the superintendent is kind of at the bottom of that hill. It's not quite as murky in the higher ed, but you still have the board of regents, you have accrediting agencies, you have local presidents, and so that is part of the challenge, your point, Lindsay, of how to tie it up together. Anyway, it was a great panel. I appreciate you guys being here, and I'll turn it back over to Kelly.
Thank you all so much. That was incredibly exciting, and it's exciting and frustrating. You realize you almost have to blow up the whole thing to make it work. But I think with people like this in charge, hopefully we can come up with some good answers. Thank you to our staff and all our other speakers and our volunteers today. It's been a great day. Appreciate all of you coming out. Safe travels, and we are adjourned.